In this episode, we have a very simple application. We have one page, and if we refresh the page, it loads as we would expect. In this application, it's being hosted on example.railsapp.dev, and its infrastructure isn't too complicated. It is simple enough, but there is a load balancer and 2 web servers. So I just finished making a deployment, and if we refresh the page multiple times, you'll see that we have 2 different server sets bouncing between. So when we get into this situation where we have multiple web servers, it becomes a bit more difficult to manage the logs. And so that's what we're going to be looking at in this episode today. And to do this, we are going to be using Papertrail because I found it's one of the most simple to get up and running. I'm a big fan of self-hosting, and one of the self-hosted libraries that you can do this with is Graylog, but I didn't like that the fact the gem hasn't been updated in 6 years. That's not to say that there's a problem with it. However, it is a bit concerning, either that Ruby is not a first-class citizen or some other reasons, but regardless, that's still a concern. And when I looked at Papertrail, I also had a similar concern because when I go to the app logs and I choose something else and I go to the Ruby on Rails, it's suggesting that I use a gem called the remote syslogger. If I look up that gem, it also hasn't been updated in 6 years. And so that's pretty concerning. And so in this episode, we're going to look at how we can aggregate our logs with a third-party service without relying on a gem that is very old. So again, you can see I'm refreshing the page here and the logs are coming in immediately. And that's one thing I really like about this, is that we don't have to wait for the logs to come in. They pretty much show up within a second. And another nice thing I like about this is that we are getting the request ID, which is the default within Rails, and we can simply do a search on that request ID to silence out a lot of the other noise. And then we can see the information for just that request. And I'm not going to go into it in this episode, but back in episode 481, I did show how we can set up the load balancer along with PostgreSQL and all of that stuff. But in this episode, we're really just focusing on the logs. And this episode is not sponsored by Papertrail. It's just one that I've found, that I've heard of before, and that I do trust. And so you're probably going to be able to do this with any kind of logging solution. I haven't tested it out with others, but as we get into it, you'll see what I mean, and it should make some sense. But if you are using Papertrail, you should go under Support, Quick Start. We want to add a system, and you'll need to take note of the logs, papertrailapp.com, and then the port number, because we will need that in a minute. And did you know that you can go to railsstore.com to get your own Ruby on Rails t-shirt or your Drift and Ruby t-shirt? To watch this full episode and more videos, visit driftandruby.com and subscribe to the Pro membership.